Well, here we are on a Monday, ready to kick off our trade here at the bottom of the hour on the daytime session. In the meantime, we'll talk about what developed in the Globex trade. We'll talk about what's been going on to set up our week of trading activity. And let's go to the phones and bring in Rich Nelson of Allendale Incorporated in McHenry, Illinois. Rich, as we come on the air here this morning, I hold in my hand here a sheet or two that show USDA reported a couple overnight sales once again. You know, we're starting to get with the program here on soybean exports. Both of these are soybean related here, and we have two different tranches reported here overnight. One is 261,000 tons of U.S. soybeans sold to China for the 2017 and 2018 marketing year. And then we have another batch for 126,000 tons, and that is to the infamous quote-unquote unknown destinations, which, wink, wink, often turns out to be a certain destination, but you can't say that. Unknown at this time. We'll find out who it is eventually. So, Rich, your thoughts? Will that help the market any today?
Certainly should. And, of course, we're coming off of Thursday's export sales report from last week, which had pretty strong 1.6 million tons of sales. So this is actually the prime time now as far as getting these soybean export sales done. Between now and the end of September, these are the peak weeks. So great to see these sales. You know, I've said before I want to see a few more, but this is definitely good to see, and market should certainly at least stabilize for today's trade in reaction.
Now, on the other hand, if we take a look at our Globex trade from overnight, we'll get our viewers and listeners updated on what the current quotes have been as we get ready for our daytime session. A little weakness in the corn market. It held fairly steady for a good share of the nighttime session, but we had December corn showing a last trade that was down about 2 cents at 3.52 3/4. March down 2 1/4. If you look at the soybean trade, well, in that Globex market, it actually sagged a little bit into the close. We had been a little firmer earlier in the evening, but we have November soybeans actually down a half at 9.68 1/4, and you had January down a half at 9.78 1/4, so it didn't go very far when it was all said and done. If you look at the wheat trade in the overnight session here, on the wheat, we had Chicago December down 2 1/4 at 4.46 3/4. And if you look at Kansas City on the December contract, down 1 3/4 at 4.44 1/4. The new crop July down 3/4 cent. If you look at the Minneapolis wheat trade, we had December there down 1 3/4 at 6.19 3/4. Cotton market on the Globex market had December just 3 points higher at 69.10. So looking at the fundamentals that could be moving the markets here in the daytime session, I understand, I think you and I both, Rich, have been hearing some anecdotal stories of some very early harvest results as the harvest moves northward toward the main core of the Corn Belt. Sounds like the early results seem to be fairly, well, I guess you would say friendly to producers, that they have been fairly happy with the results they've been getting so far.
I think that's definitely true. In fact, Paul Georgie, Allendale's own company owner, made a trip down to southern Illinois, the very southern tip. And in terms of that region down there, which, as he said, is now beginning to see some harvest results, actually hearing some pretty good yield results, anywhere from 200 to 240 bushels an acre on corn. Soybeans, these early yield discussions, 65 to 75, and this is not the breadbasket for Illinois, so these are pretty good numbers, certainly leading the early discussions for harvest results be pretty favorable right now for yield so far.
And where do you think the biggest areas of concern might be when it comes to getting some reports out of the fall harvest here?
You know, this is definitely going to be some big questions about portions of the southern to central Illinois region, which had a few rains. Once we get into portions of Indiana as well, that central, in fact, even the north central region, which many of those producers had 3 separate attempts to plant this year. So I think those are going to be some areas to watch. And then the third one will be this dryness in the western Corn Belt. Pockets in Nebraska, but certainly pockets in that south central Iowa region. That's where the big questions are here.
Very good information. All right, Rich, hang in there with me if you don't mind. We'll talk a little livestock market action when we come back. We're talking with Rich Nelson, and we'll have more when we come back after this. Well, we're back with you talking with RichNelson of Allendale Incorporated in McHenry, Illinois, as we look at our livestock trade. And Rich, I wanted to focus here, first of all, on some of the commodity fund positioning. I noted where in most of the grain contracts or the grain futures, the large commodity funds have gone to net short positions. Now, I was looking at positioning here on the cattle and the hogs, and it looks like there has been a little divergence in the way that they've been buying and selling contracts here in the last week. What do you show on your trends?
You know, as far as the numbers here from Friday afternoon's Commitment to Traders report, we saw cattle, our funds in cattle buying 4,400 contracts in the week ended through last Tuesday. They've been generally sellers, of course, for quite some time on the cattle end. In fact, I want to say easily 8 of the past 9 weeks have been net selling. So good to see a small rebound on the cattle for the fund buying. As far as the hog discussion, we actually did see another week of selling. This now makes it 4 weeks in a row. In the case of this most recent week, 3,864 contracts.
All right, now as we look at the way the markets finished up last week, now we did have a cash cattle market that developed, and from what I understand, it was very late on Friday, almost too late to really get a read on what the volume might have been. But it sounds like the trade actually drifted a little higher, anywhere up to 106, I guess, on a live basis. It looks like on a dress basis, the market was bringing 165 to 166 as we wrapped up the week. That would seem to hold true with the way the futures closed. We had a strong finish on Friday in the cattle market there.
Sure, there was. And so this is our first really kind of week of gain, or I should say our second week of gains. In this case, not a big one here in any major respect, but at least we're holding the line after what's been a very tough past few weeks. One thing to note, we had this small rebound last year at the exact same week, and then we started falling again into October. Now the question is whether this now represents a new point of stability for us or a temporary zone before we have this next leg down. One thing we're still concerned about is both last week's sales and the week before were done with generally lighter volume. We'd like to see these packers buy with maybe a little aggressive mindset, both in terms of price and volume, to get to our sales feeling maybe a little more confident about this market here.
Now, on the hog side, we had lower cash hog markets reported on Friday, and of course, it's going to be hard to tell what the futures are going to do here. The funds were net sellers of about 3,800 contracts, I understand, last week. Hog weights have been higher, over 2 pounds higher last week, I understand.
And that's one kind of concern here for us. We've talked before about this question about fourth quarter production numbers, what's lying ahead of us, whether it's going to be a 2 or 3 or even 5% year-over-year increase. But this weight discussion, as you're mentioning, is kind of a hidden, creeping problem here for us. We certainly don't want this idea of rising weights going into our largest supply time frame of the year. So at this point, still a slight concern for us. Not a panic situation, but it is something we have to watch here in these next few days.
Well, thank you, Rich, for all the info. Good to visit with you. RichNelson of Allendale Incorporated in McHenry, Illinois. And Janet, all the key primal cuts on the pork were lower Friday, too.
All right. Thank you once again for the rundown, Marlon.